life's greatest questions seem like a mystery? Well, we're probably going to talk about it here at Appalachian Liturgy. Important questions like, are you a Jedi or an Imperial? Is oatmeal actually a breakfast cereal? Is a Catholic weekday really called a ferial? Did you know that Mr. Rogers was Presbyterial? So join us as we have a little fun talking about thy kingdom come. Appalachian Liturgy.
Okay, welcome everyone to the Appalachian Liturgy podcast. I am Justin Stacy.
I'm the Reverend Brooke Ashley.
And I'm Justin Bowling.
And tonight, I guess it's with a heavy heart, we have to talk again about another tragic event, this time natural disasters. So this past week, we've had Hurricane Ida to hit Louisiana and other states. We've had parts of Middle Tennessee who had flooding, I think, last week before Hurricane Ida. And then just last Monday, we had flooding in my hometown of Hurley, Virginia. And it honestly has washed specifically my neighborhood, the road that I grew up on, it's washed it off the map. Like the people that I've known, homes that I'm familiar with, that I would consider neighbors, gone. And it's hard. It's been hard to look at that. Now, fortunately, my family is completely safe. My family's property is for the most part completely intact. They had some damage to their carport, but basically that's nothing compared to everybody else. So my family was truly protected, but so many people has lost. There was one death. They have lost all of their homes, their vehicles, pets, horses. It's unimaginable at the damage, total loss. And I've been struggling to deal with that this week because it's just a lot of people that I know.
The pictures coming out of Hurley are just breathtaking. We usually use breathtaking as being beautiful, but they have been breathtaking in that the destruction is so complete almost. And then
it looks surreal, like out of a movie or something.
Yeah.
It's a war zone is what it looks like.
I mean, the pictures of the mudslides where the houses are just surrounded, not just by mud, but rock. And just tons of rock. And, I know that a lot of people don't know what we're talking about, don't know where Hurley is, will never be in Hurley, but it's just
a small mountain town. I mean, it's cushioned up in the mountains of Southwest Virginia. It's and
the water had nowhere to go.
No, it didn't.
It just
That's
came
the thing.
rushing down the mountain.
It happened within an hour. It seems like of that morning, and all that water was on top of the mountain, and it just came off with mudslides and
with the mountain.
With the mountain, yeah.
And then to think, the news is reporting that 30 days no electricity, maybe a year before public water. Is your family affected by the outages?
Oh,
or
absolutely, absolutely. So there is mixed reporting on that. Like I think the official statement is 30 days for electricity and up to a year for water. But the supervisor of Knox Creek, which is Hurley, has said that he's working close with AEP and the tree cutting services and stuff, and that they are working to get most of Guess's Fork, at least the power poles replaced with the lines up by next week. And the thing is that was almost like a main hub for a lot of places in Hurley. Guess's Fork is. So it not only affects, my family. Guess's Fork is kind of like it's a holler road almost, to where you have the main part, but then it forks off into a left branch and a right branch. My parents live on the right branch. There's the left branch, but the electricity actually goes over the mountain to a place called Elk Creek. Okay. Mm-hmm. and it's just another part of the county, but they rely on Guess's Fork. So they are without power too. So, they are making it a priority to get Guess's Fork back up, at the very least, to get the power lines run through Guess's Fork again, so that any home that is able to hook back up can hook back up. And the estimates there for that is supposed to be next week. So hopefully that is the case. Now, they are also going to be bringing in big containers of water, so that families who relied on PSA water to be able to have something. So they're supposed to be, huge crates of water, bringing them to their property. Now, my parents, they have PSA water, but they also had well water before that, and they still have the hookups for that. So my dad, I think that their plan is that they're going to hook back up to well water and then just boil it and do what they can to decontaminate it, but still have some running water to their property once they're able to get electricity. Right. Now, my grandfather and my dad, they do have a generator. I don't know if it's a full home generator or whatever, but at least my family is going to have some power capabilities in the near term. I think Dad got it hooked up today, maybe. So they are in much better shape than what most of our neighbors is. Like most everyone is homeless, basically. Mm-hmm. And I'm heartbroken.
Yeah, and flood damage, and it's so long term. Like, there's going to be damage that's going to keep showing up. I mean, in the homes that are not destroyed, the mold, it is just. So whenever you're working disaster relief and going to a flood, very often the health department comes around and just gives you shots. I mean, they're like, you need this shot and that shot. And I mean, it's nasty. It's dirt. I mean, it's mind blowing to think about what it is. When I was talking to folks the other day, it's one thing when you see things on TV afar, or maybe a place that you visited on vacation or something like that. And that's heart-wrenching enough. But when it is in places that you have visited and the people who are there, right, and there's a sense of hopelessness and helplessness. Like, having worked disaster relief, there's the initial disaster, and then you have what's called the secondary disaster. And it really is people donating things that you just don't need yet. And it's out of the goodness of their hearts, but these folks don't need wardrobes and wardrobes of clothes. They have nowhere to put them right now.
That seems like the case right now. A lot of places are saying we cannot take more clothing. We are getting bombarded with clothes. That's not the immediate thing that people will need. Water and food really is the immediate thing. And cleaning supplies.
Things to hang on, and masks to wear, and gloves, and I mean, it's just I remember how. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying that's really good information, because that's definitely not something you kind of think about. You think about I'll try to give something that'll help, and clothing is usually pretty easy, and you want to keep people warm and clothed, but that's like you said, that's just not something that went through my head before, so I could easily have.
It really is. I mean, we do call it the second disaster. Because there's nowhere to put it. And, when you're living in a hotel, you only have so much space or so many pieces of clothing. And, so it's hard for people to wrap their minds around that.
Yeah. And unfortunately, a lot of times with flooding, a lot of people don't have flood insurance because it's too expensive. Either it's too expensive or you just can't get it. You're in a flood zone, you can't get it. So I would say that that's going to be a big portion of the people that were hit did not have flood insurance.
Well,
if I got hit with a flood, I wouldn't be covered either. I don't have flood insurance.
I'm really hoping that it'll qualify for FEMA relief. And
I think it will.
People get frustrated. There's a dollar value that it has to hit
Mm-hmm.
So a couple years ago, when we had all the flooding in Richlands and Tazewell County, it did not qualify because even though it was extensive damage, it was right below the threshold for FEMA relief. So, it's one of those things where if it's going to happen, you kind of want it to be bad enough that you qualify for some of the relief.
I know that the supervisor is working closely with FEMA to try and get help. So I'm going to assume that it's going to qualify. I'm going to assume that FEMA will be able to help. Hopefully, we'll see.
I hope so. And not just in Hurley, but all across the eastern seaboard. I mean, I was reading about the flash flooding in New York City.
Oh, yes.
Where people were trapped in their apartments because the floodwaters rose so quickly they couldn't get out of the first floor. I mean, you feel like you're safe in your own home, but then to have something like that happen. I shouldn't have been reading those articles late last night, but that's, what I was reading at 2 a.m. when I was up, and
I've seen some videos of New York, and I think I read somewhere that this was one of the first times they've had to give a flash flood warning for New York City.
So I read it was the second time, and the first one was just a few hours earlier.
Yeah.
Oh, jeez.
Mm-hmm.
It's nuts. And yeah, I've seen some videos from New York, and that was crazy. That was a lot of water. A lot of water. I mean, it's crazy to think what disasters we're dealing with now. I mean, people should just look around at what changes we're seeing in the climate. We are seeing more natural disasters more often in places that you never thought would have to deal with this. So it's scary, really. But I guess the thing that is troubling with disasters and things like this, I think that people think about, especially if you're the one that has been a victim of it, is you question why would God allow this? What did I do? What did I do that was so wrong that where I deserve this, or my neighbors, or my family, or my friends? What did they do? And these are all the natural questions we think about. This is what troubles us. But do we is there any answers? Is there any good answers to that? Is there any biblical answers to that? That's what I want to know.
So I struggle with this because, Genesis 1 and 2 tells us that God created this world for good, that he created everything in it for good. He created us for good. He gave us everything that we would want or need in that. I mean, God's desire for us is good. Like, God doesn't want us to be pained. God doesn't want us to suffer. Like, I believe that in every core of my body. And I think that, or every fiber of my body. Lord, I can't even get saying dry now. Anyway, and I think scripture backs that up for the most part. I mean, even when humanity screws it up royally in the garden, and God comes looking for them and realizes that they've clothed themselves in itchy poison ivy leaves or fig leaves or whatever, what does God do but creates clothing out of fur by killing them so that people are comforted and are not as miserable as they might be? So, I struggle with this because I don't think that there's just one thing you can point to in scripture that says this is why this happens or this is why it doesn't happen. I think that's why it's so important that scripture as a whole and not just cherry pick stories.
I think Go ahead.
No, you can go ahead.
Okay. I was just gonna say, I think the story of Jesus calming the storm kind of points us to the idea that this earth in its current form is not the way God intended. It wasn't the full design. It wasn't fully complete. It's not fully perfect. And Jesus...
It was, but it is no longer.
Because God's not here. God's not on earth.
Because we messed it up.
Because we messed it up. Correct.
Mm-hmm.
But, I think you could even take into account. But a lot of people will say that, oh, well, there was no death before the fall. But if you look at scientific proof, before humanity, before humans, there was death. Like, animals died. That was part of the process that life came to be. So how do we account for that? And the way, in my mind, that I've interpreted that is that God, when God made humanity, gave us his image, he fully intended us to be in full communion with him, with his presence on earth. And it's his presence that would have solved all of the problems that the creation, and why he created it to be this way, to have John Walton, Old Testament scholar, he calls it chaos. God brings order to chaos, but the creation itself was formed in chaos. It was the nothing.
Oh, I'd push back with that. I'd push back hard on that. I think
really,
there was creation and God brought order to the world. But when you look at the creation story, when humanity is there and the fall hasn't happened, things are orderly.
What about the scripture? Orderly. What about in Genesis where it says that he brought nothing, he brought creation out of nothing? So John Walton says that means that it's basically unorder or chaos, and he's bringing order to it. That's how he interprets it.
So he's saying that the world was created and God brought order to it?
He's saying God created...
That's why I'm getting confused. If the chaos isn't nothing, chaos is something. It's a jumbled mess of something, but it's something.
It's a process God created. He's not saying that God didn't create everything. He's saying that the process by which God chose to create the universe and earth and everything else is chaotic, and it's God's presence on the earth that would have brought the order, the perfect order, made it good. And it's us who sinned that took away that order.
I don't think I like the word I see where he's going from. I mean, where he's coming from, I guess, with the idea that, it's God's presence that would, grant humans, kind of immortality in the garden and created that perfect communion with him, and, would have prevented death. It's not our natural state to, that's kind of where he's going with that.
Yeah.
But the idea of chaos seems like not reconcilable with the idea of like what it seems like Genesis is saying, and that God created an orderly universe where there's laws and rules and things that we can expect. And we know that's how he created the universe, and that there's these laws of physics and things like that are, the way the universe is governed. But so, yeah, I guess I don't like the description of calling it chaos per se, I guess is probably where I feel like I'd have to push back on that too.
Okay. Yeah. Well, that's probably neither here nor there.
No, we have to argue about this very fine point.
Listen, so wait a minute, but it is a vitally important point.
I think it is too.
It is vitally important, and for all of our folks who say that we never disagree,
this might be it. Yeah,
this is it. I mean, I looked it up, and I looked up in several different English translations of the Bible, and I'm not finding the word chaos. I'm finding, in the beginning, God created, from the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep. So, and I guess here's where I struggle with the idea of God creating something out of chaos or putting order to the chaos. It makes it sound like the stuff was there.
Yeah, that too.
And God just sorted it out. Like, well, I go into...
That's definitely not what he meant by that. And I'm going to send you all this article where he talks about chaos creatures specifically, where the creatures
problem with that is that every time God creates a creature or creates humanity, God says it is good.
Yeah, he actually makes the point to make the distinction between good and perfect. That good isn't perfect. Maybe y'all don't like John Walton at all here. I don't think we've had in-depth discussions with him, but I love him. Like, I've been following him for years. And
well, here's my pushback on that. But God is there present, and God can't be in the presence of something that isn't perfect or holy. So if he's arguing that when they say it's not, that it's good and it's not holy or perfect, I would push back on that.
Can't God call something good without it being perfect? I mean, can't he say, this is good, for humanity, for the creation, this is good, but it's not the full
He's not saying
picture.
It is good for, he is saying it is good.
Yeah, and like,
and then what
contrast
about
what Jesus talks about in the New Testament when somebody calls him good? He asks, "Why do you call me good? No one's good but God alone." Like, that seems like it's being used, and I know that's different books.
I'd want to know what the word is. I wonder what the original language word is there. I don't have my software up to look at that.
He also makes the point that humanity was always tasked with creation care.
Mm-hmm.
That was before the fall. That was before the fall. Yeah. So he makes the point that creation was in a state to where humanity was going to be a part of the care of it, which means there was going to be things that aren't considered, I guess, perfect, because we are in charge of things. Things have to be able to go wrong, I guess. We just wouldn't have had the death part of it. We wouldn't have experienced death if we had that full access to God with the tree of life.
We wouldn't have, sure, okay. But I guess like tying the morality of human death to the same level as morality of animal death is also like a little bit different thing here. Like, humans dying is different than animals dying, which could be considered part of the natural.
Right, which I think is what brought this whole discussion up, in that we probably shouldn't look at animal death. Like, if we believe science, we believe the age of the earth, we believe that animals did die as part of the creation science.
Yeah.
Then we shouldn't have a problem with that, because it's not the same morality. It's not the same eternal aspect than us experiencing death.
Right.
Does that make sense?
A cheetah eating a zebra is neither good nor bad. It's just what a
cheetah
neutral. Does. It's part of its nature.
It's neutral.
Right.
And that's actually something that John Walton talks about in this article. It's neutral. Like, there's a lot of things that we consider, as humans, we consider evil. We would look at as evil, natural disasters. This article is actually on coronavirus. So they're talking specifically about coronavirus. But to us, we see that the pain it causes, suffering it causes, the death it causes, and we see it as evil. But it's just doing what it's designed to do. It's neutral. And does that
not a moral actor?
It's not a moral actor. It doesn't have the law, I guess you could say, programmed into it as this is something that, is ungodly or unjust or whatever. Whereas we have that. So we can interpret things that are ungodly, unjust, and immoral, whereas other things can't. They're not designed to do that. So, yeah,
we took a little rabbit hole there, didn't we?
We did. We really did. I didn't see that one coming, honestly.
So he would say, I mean, and I don't disagree with him on this, that a natural disaster is a morally neutral event. That God didn't cause it and God didn't stop it. And I would totally agree with John Walton on that. I would totally agree.
The book of Job, of course, again, in this article on coronavirus, they turn to the book of Job. And I think everybody turns to the book of Job. When something bad happens, that is the book you go to, because this is a story of someone who, as far as we can tell, was righteous. He was godly. He did what he should. And then, because of a wager that the Satan and God had in the heavenly realms, this guy's life goes haywire. And, then his friends are less than helpful. And he's wondering, what did I do? Why is
down
this
a rabbit hole during a disaster? His friends just like want to teach him philosophy and
exactly. And
but we do that as a culture too.
Yeah, I've struggled with the book of Job. I think everybody struggles with the book of Job to really find the intent. Like, because this story kind of disturbs me, and it may be just from the more Protestant, coming from a Protestant background, Protestant brain, in that I'm reading something that was God written, and to think that this actually happened, where God and Satan sit down and had a wager, that disturbs me a bit. But that's not the intent of the story.
So see, when I read Job, I think of it this way. God was so confident in Job's faith in him that he was like, you know, he knows that I love him so much that he's not going to turn on me.
Yeah.
And I think it's easy to approach Job. I love the book of Job. I do find a lot of satisfaction in reading Job, and I think it can be summed up in a quote from G.K. Chesterton, who said that the riddles of God are more satisfying than the answers of men, the solutions of men. And I think that's a good summary of Job, because we can come to it looking for, like, okay, let's look for the reason that God did this to Job. But in the end, God never gives the reason. When Job questions him, and Job, he tells Job that he has, he can question him, type thing. Like Job asks, why are you doing this? But God doesn't tell him, exact reason, like, oh, I did this because X, Y, and Z. Instead, God just asks him, where were you when I created the world and all that you see? And so, like, that's what I think you see in Job, is the first part of what you said, that it's not something bad happening to us isn't because of what we've done or something like that. It's not necessarily God giving punishment for retribution or something that us or a family or our community or somebody has done, but it can be something beyond our knowledge. But what we do know is that God is in control. God will be there with us, and Christ will be there with us, as we learn in the New Testament. And we have that comfort of and that hope from God through these events. Not that we have strict answers for X, Y, and Z, but we do have that hope and that comfort of knowing that God's in control.
Yeah.
So, and I think there's a little common sense here too. So when we think about natural disaster, especially like the ones we're just having, the hurricanes and the destruction, we as humanity have decided to build in places where these things happen.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, Hurley's a little bit different. I mean, there's not been a flood there in a long time.
2002 was the last flood, and then before that was 77. So it's very rare that it happens.
It's very rare. But in some of these places, in our hurricane-prone places, we build these huge homes and stuff, knowing that there's a pretty good chance that you're going to have a hurricane come through. So I mean, we are making decisions that are bringing some of this destruction on ourselves. Like,
and these are not easy questions, like any of this. Like, I mean, that it has a whole name. The Odyssey, the study of the problem of evil, has been something that's studied constantly throughout, all religions, and Christianity especially. Like, these are hard questions, and there's not like one silver bullet answer type thing that works. But I think Scripture also tells us that there's not a single answer that we would be able to comprehend.
Yeah. I know that when I'm working with folks who are really struggling to believe in God, the God that we worship as Christians, the number one thing that they want to know is, if God is good, then why do bad things happen?
Yeah.
Like, if God is all powerful and God is all knowing, then why do I suffer? Why does my family suffer? Why does the kid down the street have cancer? Why are there hurricanes? Why did people in Hurley get their homes knocked off their foundations? I mean, that is a hard question to answer, and you don't have a silver bullet for that answer, for that question.
So there's one of my favorite books. It's a long book to get through, but the Brothers Karamazov, there's a story in there called Grand Inquisitor, to where there's two brothers, and one of the main characters, they're both main characters, but one of them's an atheist and one of them's studying to become a priest. And the atheist is going on a rant to his brother and telling him why he left and decided to do these things. And he goes on this rant about, like, how Christ messed up. If he was real and lived, that he messed up by giving us too much freedom. He people aren't going to worship or do the right thing while they're still hungry. You got to take care of these things, kind of like a problem of evil type thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes on for a long time. And then at the end, he asks his brother, what do you think about this? What would you say to somebody like me? And he doesn't say anything. And instead he just gives him a hug, because that's what he comes to realize, is that he's saying, like, Christ doesn't necessarily answer all these questions, but Christ is there with us during our sufferings, type thing.
Yeah.
And that's what we're promised from Christianity, is that we have that hope of having Christ with us, of God with us.
Yeah. I mean, we've been talking about incarnation in the Sunday school class that I've been teaching. And in the fact that God put on flesh and suffered through some of the effects of sinful life. I mean, that is something that is super comforting to me. The fact that Jesus experienced a major storm in a boat on a body of water is comforting to me. So that when I'm doing that and I cry out, I have a God that understands what it's like from the humanity standpoint. So when the folks from Hurley cry out because they don't have a place to lay their head, God understands, because Jesus also didn't have a place to lay his head, and for me, there's great comfort in that.
Right. That has actually helped me with the book of Job to not only better understand it, but to just find more inspiration out of it, in that I'm not concentrating on why is God and Satan doing this? Like, why is this happening to Job? These are the questions Job was asking, and it's the questions that I think we ask, but that's not the question that is trying to be answered. The question that's being answered is Job is remaining faithful to God regardless of the situation, regardless of circumstance. He's remaining faithful to God, and that's what God wants. That's what God expects us believers to do. Remain faithful to him, and he will see you through in some form or fashion, even if we end up dying. Let's say that the ultimate penalty for our sin, or let's say not sin, just we didn't have any control of this, but we paid the ultimate price. God is still taking care of us, even after death. He's still taking care of us. So we have that assurance, we have that protection. And I think that is the point of Job.
Right. I don't disagree with you at all. I do think that the popularity of the prosperity gospel keeps us from really wrestling with what is suffering, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This idea that if you suffer, it's because you've done something incorrectly, or if you're poor or you're a victim of a natural disaster, then it points directly to something that you've done. And if you were faithful enough, or if you had it, you wouldn't be that way. That has caused such a divide, if you will, I think, in the way we view God as a culture, that it's so distinctly American. That it causes us to go down some of these rabbit holes about, well, man, that person is having a bad string of luck. I mean, they must not be as good as we think they are. Or
I think there's two sides to the coin for the prosperity gospel. So, heads, prosperity gospel. Tails is the retribution principle.
Mm-hmm.
There's two sides of the same coin. You got the negative side, you got the positive side. Now, one of the points that John Walton has made about the purpose of Job being written, like the full context of why do we see this in our canon Bibles? It's because so many religions during that time practiced retribution principle. So this is the Jewish answer to that. Here is the correct way. We don't buy into retribution principle. So here is the story of Job. And I think that helps with the context of why do we see this story? It's because retribution principle was running wild in the ancient times.
Yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense. You think about like ancient peoples who would have, saw a natural disaster hit some area, and the first read of that is going to be that, it's some God punishing them because they did something wrong, and they need to keep worshiping their God.
Yeah, not even, think about when Katrina hit.
Oh yeah, we see it
New
today.
Orleans.
Oh yes.
You had preachers preaching. So that happened on a Sunday. and or maybe late Saturday night into Sunday morning, and you had preachers preaching that Sunday that God had had enough with the evil of New Orleans and brought his wrath upon the citizens of New Orleans.
Yep. I heard that sermon.
Yeah, I mean, people have said that about coronavirus. They say about everything. And I guess possibly God can do something like that, but you certainly don't know that. We don't know how God works.
Right.
That is the point of what John
I think
said.
people take stories like Noah and the flood to where it's because of the evil of the world that God sends a natural disaster. So people are automatically thinking this is always the case, but it's not always the case. We don't have a special revelation as to why a specific natural disaster happens. And because we don't, I don't think we should make assumptions as to why they happen.
I think it's a good point that we can't make an assumption that God has caused something or not caused something to happen. And we see the flip side too. Like if there's a tornado and somebody's house gets skipped, and we've seen this happen well, God was protecting my house. Well, does that mean that God wasn't protecting your neighbor's home? I mean, that.
Yeah. It's a tough thing to really get our minds around, because even myself, I think when we started the show here, I said my family was protected. Their property was protected. And that's what I meant by that. But I didn't mean that God was not protecting everybody else.
You already said it, can't take it back. I'm recording now.
I'm going to edit that out. It's a hard thing. It's a hard thing to get our mind around, really.
Yeah.
But I do believe
that between expressing thanks for not having destruction and assuming it's because God likes you better.
I think that's a lot of our verbiage can sound like that is kind of is a lot of the problem. Like when we say that, I'm thankful for God for protecting me. There's nothing wrong with saying that unless you mean it in the negative way that you had pointed out, because that is how it would be easy to just kind of verbalize it that way. And I think we all do that. Maybe I don't know if it's specific to this area or just that's just how
I think we all just do it.
Thing, but
when something good happens, we say we're blessed and God had his hand in it. Yeah.
#blessed.
That's right.
How are you today? I'm blessed.
So I know one thing. I was going to segue to, I know a topic you two wanted to talk about would you be comfortable with saying that God is doing this for a reason, though, that there's some reason of good that he has behind it that we may not just know it?
So I think that ties into exactly what I was getting ready to say, which is scripture from John 9, where Jesus, the crowd is asking Jesus, why has a man been born blind? And they're really wanting to know who sinned. Did he sin because he's born blind? Did he sin, or did his parents sin? And Jesus' response is, it's so God can be glorified. And that's an interesting response, because he's not answering their question specifically. So to me, that means it's neither of those. But what does it mean so God can be glorified? Can we say that for all natural disasters? Can we say that coronavirus? Can we say that for the flood, Hurricane Ida, so God can be glorified? And if we can, what does that mean? Does that mean God did this so that he can be glorified? And what does that mean?
So, go ahead.
I believe what that means is that
all give heretical opinions. We're just gonna.
This is my interpretation. Is that it's so that we can be that healing agent, that helping hand, and when Jesus healed the blind man, he was that healing agent. So he was doing that act, which is glorifying God. But that doesn't mean that God specifically made this man blind. Right. And so I think you can interpret that on all of these things. These things happen. We don't know why it happens. We don't know what hand God has in it and what hand he doesn't have in it. What we do know is what we can do about it.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
that's,
So, I feel like we've been living this out this year in my family. When I went into the hospital with my oldest daughter on the 19th of November, and she was 26 weeks pregnant, and the surgeon looked at me as he's taking her to deliver my grandson, and he says to me, I have a 50% chance of bringing either one of these back alive. I cannot imagine that God caused that to happen so that the events of the next couple months would glorify him, because we saw God glorified. We saw miracles happen with Hudson. We saw miracles in the way folks responded and helped and supported us. But I cannot imagine that God caused all of that grief and hurt so that later on he could be glorified. I do believe that God can bring good in all situations, right? In the crappiest of the crappy situation, there can be good from that. That doesn't mean that the good that's brought out of it equals or neutralizes the heartache that has happened in the situation, right? But that good can be brought out of it.
Yeah, I think something along those lines it's a hard question to answer, because I do think that we see in Scripture there's the promise of Romans 8 that says God works all things for the good for those who trust in him. And then we see there's a line in the Easter exaltation of the Mass that says Felix culpa, which means happy fall, and it goes like, oh, happy fall that earned for us so great a Redeemer. That idea that of the greatest evil, the fall of humanity turning our back from God and losing communion with him, that God brought something even better out of it. And so I do think we have that hope that God can bring something good out of anything that happens. But that is a slightly different question than did he cause it, like you said, directly.
Right.
But I do like that answer too. You're talking about, Justin, like you're talking about no matter when something bad happens, we can join our sufferings to the sufferings of Christ and participate in him, or with him in helping somebody who's in that situation, or using our own sufferings to help glorify him through that. And that is a participation in that Christly ministry that he has asked us to participate with. He asked us to pick up our cross and follow him, and that's what we see when we go through these things.
Yeah, and I think another maybe important thing we should remember when we see these tragedies, when these tragedies happen to us, we often question God. Why did you allow this to happen? Why did you make this happen? Why did you do this? Why did you do that? But as part of being Christians, we also believe there is evil agents acting on the opposite of good, right? We believe in the devil. We believe in fallen angels, demons. So why not say, why are they up to no good at this point? What are they doing? But we don't seem to do that. We tend to want to blame God a lot. And I find that kind of interesting because, and again, I don't know how much you can say this was just the devil at doing his evil work or whatever. But we don't have special revelation to know what's what when it comes to these things. So I think the best we can do is stay in the present. What can we do that now that it happened? Can we be Christ-like? Can we be a healing agent? Can we help our neighbor, love our neighbor? And if we do that, then we are glorifying God. That's the best way we can glorify God. And that's been the response. It was a response in 2002 in the Hurley Flood. It's the response now. The day of the flood, I think they said after the flood was over, it only lasted maybe 2 hours. All of that chaos happened in 2 hours. And I think they had about 500 people to show up to help with the recovery and things like that. So it's an outpouring of love and care that has went in to the Hurley community from all the surrounding areas. You have all of Southwest Virginia and maybe parts of Tennessee that is doing things to help with the recovery and donations and things like that. that's an outpouring of love. And to me, that's where Christ is. That's where he calls us to be. And ultimately, that's where God is. God is in the response of it. Now, and we shouldn't just concentrate on trying to explain why God allowed it to happen. It's just it's wasted time on our part to try and figure that out.
Yeah, I've always been struck by the generosity of folks when bad things happen. I mean, just it's crazy, and I think that we know bad things are going to happen, so we kind of prepare for them, and then are able to respond quickly. And I think that all that we do should reflect who God is, and God is consistent, and God is a God of order, and God is faithful. And I think the struggle with any kind of disaster, natural, man-made, whatever, is having the consistency to follow through. So we see this huge outcry at first when a disaster happens, but it's the follow through that really reflects the character of God. The long-term support, the not forgetting that it's there, kind of things.
It's rough. Like, this has been a rough week for especially everyone from Hurley. I guess to go through the emotions.
I think
it takes me back to 2002.
And I think you have to be careful. Even Jesus, when Jesus knew what was coming, when he was in the garden, he knew what was coming. He pleads to God, if there's any other way, take this from me. I don't really want to do this.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm surrendering to you.
It's one of my favorite verses of the Bible.
Something similar too. Like, we shouldn't shy away from asking God, pouring out our heart to him and asking, why is this happening, type of thing. Like that's totally, what he wants us to do.
Yeah.
That's what you do with somebody you're in a close relationship with. But
even when an answer's not coming.
Exactly.
Right?
And then that's the other part of it too.
Don't expect an answer.
Sometimes when you're going through something rough, you just want somebody there to listen to, type of thing. And
ministry of presence.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. I guess we've talked quite a bit on this. I wanted to get my thoughts out and really, I guess, vent and express to you all what I've been thinking about. My heart
is an ever-present topic, but it's always more present, like you said, when it happens.
When it hits you close to home. Yeah. It is. And my heart's with Hurley right now.
Absolutely. Really. And let's tell our listeners how they can help.
Yeah.
With the flood.
Okay. Relief. So I've set up a page on our website, AppalachianLiturgy.com/disaster relief. And of course, we'll leave that link in our show notes. But it has all of the information on how to donate, physically donate items. There's monetary donations that you can make. They have a Hurley Relief Fund through New People's Bank of Grundy, and you can use PayPal to send that online. So I have all of that information on that page. Also, I think Gray is doing something as well. Do you want to mention that?
Yeah. So the Methodist Church has what's called UMCOR, which is the United Methodist Committee on Relief. And they respond in natural disasters or in man-made disasters. They work alongside with FEMA, but we have all these different kits that through the years have been tweaked, that everything in that kit has a purpose and a use immediately in this idea of floods. So our reserves of flood buckets have been depleted with all the stuff that's been going on. So we're collecting those items to do. We're gonna have a flood bucket packing party where we pack those buckets up, and they are stored here and across the country to be able to respond immediately. And I bet you there are United Methodist flood buckets in Hurley right now.
I guarantee it.
And knowing that agency and how we work that. So yeah. So we can take that, and we can take donations to purchase those. And I've had the distinct privilege of being one of those folks going in and handing those buckets to folks and helping them string the clothesline out and hang things up with the clothespins and having the cleaning stuff. I think you forget what it's like to have everything that you own covered in mud.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly right. So all of that information is on the disaster relief page that I have set up, AppalachianLiturgy.com. So check that out. If you can donate anything, please do. I think physical items, specifically water, cleaning supplies, things like that is more important now than what clothing is. Clothing's important, but a lot of these places aren't accepting clothing because there's just so much of it. So cleaning supplies and water and food and things like that, that is the most important part currently. So check that out. If you can give, think about doing so. There's also information on relief efforts for Middle Tennessee and Hurricane Ida with Louisiana. I've included that as well. If you feel called to give for those things, please do. The lot of suffering people in those areas as well. Thanks everyone for your prayers for Hurley and for all of these events with the families and victims, and families who've lost loved ones to these tragic events. My heart goes out to you. My prayers are with you. Help us be an answer to those prayers. People are praying for help, so let's help them any way we can. My heart is with Hurley. I love my hometown. I love all the people there. And peace be to you. Have a good night. Thank you so much for tuning in. We really hope you got some enjoyment out of the podcast this week. Remember to check out our website, www.appalachianliturgy.com, and follow us on all of our social medias. If you want an easy way to support us, though, make sure to subscribe to our channels and like our videos on YouTube. Also, join our email list for updates and let us know how we're doing. See you next week, everyone. Appalachian Liturgy Podcast is a JRS Studios production.